What kind of poetry inspired you to become a poet?
Fourth grade, I memorized James Weldon Johnson's The Creation for the oratory competition. Um, and I thought, oh, I can say that. I didn't think I could write that, but I definitely got on stage and said that thing. But then at 2021, Leave It to Love Jones and Sister Sonia Sanchez's poem ringing out at the end, in the beginning. And I was like, no, I want to do that. I want to do that now. And it took me a year from seeing that film to when I was dared to write a poem and perform it at an open mic. Um, Before I realized like that was where I wanted to like spend a lot of my time. I've always been a writer, very much in love with writing in all genres. So much so now, even though I consider myself a poet, I recognize that I use poetry as the nucleus for all the ways in which I, um, you know, investigate the genres, and that has a lot to do with my love for reading as a young person. Yeah. How about you?
I was a performer before I was a reader. And when I think about how I found my way to poetry, or when I uncovered a poet that first was like, oh, I could see myself in that, it was through the experience of listening or memorizing scenes from plays in sixth and seventh grade, right? It was the experience of feeling and seeing my own body in motion and embodying language that made me excited about that possibility for myself. It's what made me fall in love with language. I grew up in a family where everybody was really avid readers, and I struggled as a reader. And I have vivid memories as a little kid when it was like reading time in my house. Everybody would read, and I remember just looking at the book and pretending to turn the page because like that's what people did when they were quote unquote reading. And I don't know, I will never forget that. And it stands out because I love reading now. But the thing that allowed me to be excited about it was music, and it was drama, and it was ways of finding myself in the auditory experience of reading and language that felt more like the literacy that I needed and wanted at the time I was learning to read texts and books. And I still feel that way. There is a deep musicality to much of my poetry, my poems, much of the work that I fell in love with, and the community of poets that I created around myself in New York as a young 20-something person honors that musicality of language, you know. It's always necessary to name that I had a high school English teacher, right? His name was Jeff Cass. Yay. And he, for a living, his entire job was dedicated to convincing people that they could be poets. And he convinced me. He was like, you don't have to walk around writing poems, but you do need to build a muscle for noticing the world around you. And when you do notice something, what does it mean to write it down? Just a bullet, just a thought. You might come back to it on a rainy day when you're not sure what you want to do with yourself, but there's that bullet. He's like, if I do my job right, I will start to offer lenses so that you can move through the world with a heightened sense of noticing each other and yourself. And I was like, I'm in. Turn it up.
So the both of you are major figures in performance poetry world, and you've collaborated many times. To capture the origin of that connection, Mahogany, what was the first memory of hearing Adam's poem on the page or on the stage?
Ah.
That's
Right? What was it? It was New Eurekan Poets Cafe, in which I hosted, curated, and led the poetry direction for about 14 years. And Adam had won a slam on Wednesday night, securing his role, his place in Friday Night Slam, and that's when I first saw his work. Several things happened. One, he does not look like what he's about to do. Right? You don't. You like, he gets up there and he's giving Boy Scouts, honey, like He's knocking on the door selling candy bars, like truly the sweetest. And you're like, okay, he's going to do something very Jack Kerouac, you know? It's going to be, okay, it's going to be fine. And he got up there with the same rhythm and soul that he speaks of as a performer, who has been invested in hip hop, not just lurking, right? He spoke with the same rhythmic insistence as someone who learned the blues and gospel, who got it right in the learning, who studied it and was aware of his position in the world. So he never like got up on stage and told the line with I'm cool because I know Black culture, right? He was always, you know, this young man from Michigan. Michigan? Okay. Because I messed up sometimes. But he was just like this young white guy from Michigan that had an affinity for hip hop, that had a respect of the people around him, that didn't look down at them because, you know, he may benefit from these privileges. He actually walked in with a studious effort of being an accomplice, and I noticed it. Like it's a rarity when you see it, but when you do, you know, like, okay, I can be safe here. And I listened to the poem that he performed that day, and I was like, this is not real. And then he started singing, and it was like church, truly gospel. And I thought, no way. No. And then the third round, he did it again. And I was like, okay, that's it. We need to know who he is. That's it. Yeah, he was a cool lad.
A cool lad.
The Nuyorican Poets Cafe is the most famous poetry slam in the world. And Mahogany L. Browne is the longest Friday night host that venue has ever seen. And I knew of both Mahogany and the Nuyorican Poets Cafe before I even graduated from college and came out to New York. You know, part of my trajectory toward being excited about work that merged music, drama, and like hyper attentive lyric was to the Nuyorican Poets Cafe.
And Adam, what was the first poem or performance of Mahogany's that truly stopped you in your tracks?
Whew. It had to be Single Mother Song. And the funny thing about Mahogany's work is that you can experience it in so many different ways because Mo's work is so prolific and visible, right? You can read it in anthologies and in journals. You can see it on screen. At the time, you could see her work on HBO. That I knew who she was. But it wasn't until I showed up nervous with some desire to present my own work, but really just wanted to show up and be in a space that frankly was closer to church to me than church. I just needed to learn more about where I was at. It wasn't until I was able to like watch her perform and experience the impact that her work had on a room like that that took my breath away. I remember competing in the slam, and in between the rounds, probably round 2 and 3 or something like that, you gave the judges a chance to tally up their scores, and you gave us a poem, and that poem was Single Mother Song. And I completely forgot that I was in the slam. I remember I cried, and it was just the presence that you brought into that room. And the Nuyorican is a rotating crowd. You have your regulars, but it's a famous enough venue that like half the room is there because Time Out New York said go there, which means those are maybe poetry fans, but they're also very likely people who have never been to a poetry event, and this is their one. So to know that she could that immediately and that quickly open up a room with a poem that was at once both bold and brave and very tender and very emotional, it just blew me away. It blew the hinges off of what I thought was possible and what I wanted to do in New York City. That's a person that I want to be near in some way.
How do you navigate the tension between writing and trauma and preserving your own well-being?
Yeah.
Go.
Say it again so they can hear you in the back.
You don't. Just kidding.
Something that I used to make a part of the core tenets of poetry performance, which included 8 weeks of like writing performance boot camp. One of the major tenets was, it is okay to write the hard thing. You don't have to perform it, right? Because more times than not, we witness folks writing some true, some not, some true, some not stories. And in turn, you have a lot of people who were trying on suffering for a slam score or making themselves cry for a slam score, and really triggering other people because they actually had that experience, right? People were finding themselves, their voice, using the Nuyorican stage and many other stages of performance poetry as sources of healing, when in fact, we've learned that, yes, you can say the hard thing and someone can, like, you know, awaken this desire to like figure out what that needling was within them. Maybe they get therapy, maybe they find a new self-care situation. But just writing the hard poem and then reading it and crying through it and then crumbling later does not make a good poem for me. And I had to like learn that the hard way after witnessing these young poets bare their all on stage and there be no social workers nearby, and we find out that they are untherapized and unmedicated. And then it became a real, like, I don't know, like, I won't say my ministry, but I was a stickler for, I'm not willing to put you in harm's way for the poem to be good, for us to get a 10. I would rather you write the thing and leave it in your journal so you can take that thing to your therapist, and then we write a group poem about joy. Or we write about, you know, how to burn down the system, but not just you reliving this violent trauma and crawling out of the well of yourself for a slam score.
I co-sign 100% on all that you've shared. I think I am probably a poet who did come up in the era of write toward your pain, right? Writing should risk something. Writing should feel dangerous. There should be an aspect of vulnerability and scariness for the writer. And I still cherish that way of thinking about writing. Given the context Mahogany just shared, I think what that actually means for me has evolved tremendously over the course of my life, right? Especially as a teacher, too, who did practice. Every kid has a journal, and you write in it like it's your diary every day. And if there are things that, like, you bring up that need to go down to the social worker, cool, we unearthed it. Let's go do that. Talk to them, right? It was a way of unearthing and naming where pain and trauma lived so that we could manage it or handle it in the context of a school community. Personally, I thought for a very long time that the darkest and hardest stories about who I was were the ones that held the most currency, right? Like, the parts of me that felt broken and most in need of healing were the ones that I needed to write about first before I could have the license to then go explore other topics. I don't believe that's true anymore. I do think those are stories that people should tell, people should wrestle with, and I do think writing is a deeply clinically proven tool to help us work through where our pain lives and where our trauma lives. And it is one of a litany of places where I think writing and the process of thinking in language, you know, can be healing.
Talking about reinventing yourself as an artist, how many times have you intentionally reinvented your work or identity?
Honestly, I would say twice. And maybe not re-identified myself, but expanded my identity. I started off as a poet who was on HBO's Real Sex alongside these the Punani poets who were writing poetry for a specific group, the hip hop centered group with a desire to talk about sex, safer sex methods in like this space where people didn't want to wear condoms and Eazy-E had just died. So we were like using erotica to promote safer sex methods. And that's what my introduction to the poetry world as, oh, I'm doing this for real was. I thought even when I was doing erotica, I was doing it as a joke. I was making fun of erotic poets because I thought they were corny, including, some of my castmates. I was just like, I was trying to be like this, I don't know, jester about it. And realized, years later that no, it was really groundbreaking work. And I didn't want to only be known for, this poem that was in this one specific adult space. Fast forward, I'm still writing about, killing misogyny and absolutely inspired by Bell Hooks and June Jordan and Audre Lorde, where Black feminism and Black rage are all righteous until I guess within the last 10 years. And that's been like the trajectory of my work since 2002, I would say. That has been like my focus. And then 2013, I wrote a kids poem, like just for kids, like on purpose. And while I had been teaching in schools alongside the likes of Adam Falkner, I just was teaching them poems that I read because down with the machine, baby. Like, let's go, everybody. Like, get to work, right? And then I just just oscillated my view a little. And someone said, would you write this poem for kids? And I was like, okay, I'll try. I'll try not to curse. And turns out I'm kind of good at that shit. But me not cursing for children's books and children's poems, I guess is my third identity.
So I often had the experience as a young person, which is like a pretty universal queer idea, of just sort of gently costuming as best I can to fit in here. But it's really important to me that my varsity athlete friends know that I do not do musical theater, right? And I think I spent a lot of my life trying to keep these separate selves quarantined for fear of what might happen when they collide. What happens when they collide is that we're actually, heaven forbid, we're seen or we're known. So I think the process of my own reinvention or continuing to invent myself as an artist is actually less trying on new things and more creating new conditions in my life, whether that's friendships or new books or projects that I'm working on that allow the various selves that I have historically kept quarantined in their own separate silo to tilt, so that each time I am striving to build something in the world or in a relationship with someone, I'm trying to give all of myself permission to collide.